Michael Douglas sat in the dim glow of the studio lights, answering questions about his long career in charity work, his voice steady and polished. Everything felt routine until the host leaned forward and said there was a special video message. They wanted him to see. Ibrahim Traoré seemed to freeze the air for a moment. As the screen flickered to life, the narrator's voice cut in, recalling how years ago, Michael had spoken with quiet certainty that leaders from poor nations often dream too big for where they were born. The remark, wrapped in polite language, had stirred whispers of criticism that faded quickly in the noise of other news. Now on the screen, Ibrahim appeared calm, still, and unshaken. His eyes carried the weight of storms, yet his voice was gentle. There was no anger, no raised tone, only truth. He leaned slightly forward and said, "You once told the world some people dream too big for where they were born. Let me tell you what it cost us to dream." The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to fade. The studio fell silent, the crew motionless, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The camera cut back to Michael, catching the smallest flicker of unease, quick shift in his jaw, a blink that lasted a little too long. The narrator's voice returned, low and certain. No one in that room expected the silence that followed. Years before that quiet moment in the studio, Michael Douglas had stood on stages and spoken to packed halls, his words dressed in charm and intellect, but carrying an undertone that many in Africa had heard before, that leadership and vision belonged elsewhere, that those born into hardship should be realistic about what they could achieve. His comments blended into a long history of speeches from Western figures who, often without realizing, cast shadows over entire nations with a single sentence. Narration pulled the curtain back on the larger picture, how Western media, time and again, painted African leaders as reckless, corrupt, or unprepared, even when there was no proof, and how that image stuck in the minds of millions. Flashbacks played like fragments of an unfinished film. A young reporter, clutching his notepad after a press conference, leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "They won't cover this, it doesn't fit the story they want." Another scene showed Ibrahim standing ankle-deep in muddy watering, a village where houses had collapsed from weeks of flooding. The people had been told help would come, but the aid money had been allocated to another crisis, one with more cameras and headlines. In a small office late at night, a journalist slid a tablet across the desk to Ibrahim, playing the exact clip of Michael's remark from years ago. The sound was low, but the meaning was loud. Ibrahim listened, silent, and then replayed it twice, his face unreadable. This was not a moment of rage, it was the moment he decided to answer. Not with insults, but with truth that could not be ignored. His message would not be an attack, but a mirror, reflecting back the cost of such words and the strength of those who refuse to be defined by them. The pauses in his speech would speak louder than any argument. And somewhere far away, Michael sat at home with that message glowing on his laptop screen, his hand pressed to his forehead as his own voice from the past filled the room, each syllable landing heavier than the last. The live panel was set in a room so still it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Michael Douglas sat under the bright studio lights, a glass of water untouched beside him, while a large screen showed Ibrahim's face from thousands of miles away. The host's introduction was brief, almost cautious, before giving Ibrahim the floor. His first words were simple, "Thank you for listening, Michael." There was no bite, no sarcasm, just steady calm. Then came the line that cut through, the quiet like a blade. "A man's worth is not measured by where he was born, but by what he chooses to stand for when the world is watching." The narrator described the air in the room as thick as glass about to shatter, and it was true. Every breath seemed too loud, every movement too sharp. Michael's fingers tapped once against the table before he clasped his hands to stop. The tremor, his eyes darted for a second toward the floor, then back up to the screen, but his posture seemed smaller now, as if the weight of the moment was pressing down on his shoulders. Ibrahim spoke again, each pause deliberate, his gaze never breaking. The truth in his words left no room for defense, only reflection. Michael's lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. Then, barely above a whisper, he leaned into the mic and said, "I was wrong." A ripple went through the audience, soft gasps, shifting seats like they'd just witnessed something rare. Ibrahim didn't smile or nod in victory. His reply was quiet, almost gentle. "Then let us start again, with truth." The words hung there, heavy yet freeing. As the cameras captured two men on opposite sides of the world, joined by a silence that spoke more than any applause could, Michael left the studio without stopping for the cluster of microphones and flashing cameras outside. His steps were quick but not rushed, his face turned away from the crowd. In the back seat of the car, a camera caught him lifting a hand to his cheek, brushing away what could only be a tear. That image made its way online within minutes, and the reaction was split. Some called it courage, praising him for admitting his mistake. Others said it was too late, that words from years ago had already done their damage. Old clips of his past remarks were now being replayed alongside the panel footage, changing the way his career was being remembered. At home that night, Michael sat alone in a dim living room, scrolling through photos from charity events he once felt proud of. Now, in the smiles and handshakes, he saw something else, a trace of condescension he had never noticed before. His Phone buzzed with a single message from his daughter. Proud. You owned it, Dad. It stayed on the screen a long time before he set the phone down. Thousands of miles away, Ibrahim walked through a crowded marketplace. The scent of spices in the air, the sound of traders calling out their prices. People greeted him with nods and quiet smiles. Nothing grand, but full of meaning, the kind of respect that cannot be faked. The narrator's voice returned over split images of the two men in their separate worlds. Carrying Ibrahim's final words from the panel, some bridges are built not to forget the fire, but to prove it could not burn us down. Conversations, in homes, cafes, and offices began to shift, if only a little. Questions were being asked that had never been asked before, and in that small movement lay the start of something bigger.